The Pittsburgh Steelers have to fix one of the biggest mistakes they made last offseason by addressing the safety position a lot this offseason. I'll talk about that. Also, take one of your call-in questions and give our final grades on that safety group, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. Under the Locked On Steelers podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network in the world. Steelers fans, it is Friday here on the show. I'm going solo, and I wanted to talk to you guys specifically about the safety position a lot today, because I do think it is a position that has been somewhat undervalued, and wrongly so. And I'm not just talking about by the Steelers, but by the NFL at large. But I think we saw the impact of getting the safety position wrong hit the Steelers defense by a lot this season. Now, what I mean by that is when you look at where the Steelers defense lost some of their crucial games down the stretch of this year, and look, there were different reasons for each game, right? But you could see the lack of the presence of Minkah Fitzpatrick very much impact several of their losses throughout this season, where if he was there, maybe they don't happen as much. You think about the deep balls that the Steelers were giving up against the Bengals. They didn't have safety help in that game. You think the same thing against the Packers, where they just got exposed downfield in the passing game there. Maybe less so the Chargers, because there were also some other issues there, but the Bears were certainly another team that took the top off their defense a bit in that game. And then, even a bit with the Texans, even though the game ended up being 30-6 in the end, it was 7-6 in the fourth quarter. And a big part of it, and what helped get those 7 points, was the Steelers really didn't have an answer for Christian Kirk downfield, for a couple minutes there, and that really hurt them. But this was the move that was thought to maybe would be able to fix the secondary, or let them reinvest things in what they wanted to do, when they traded away Minkah Fitzpatrick, their three-time All-Pro, first-team All-Pro safety, for Jalen Ramsey, another first-team All-Pro guy at corner, and thinking that he was going to revolutionize the corner position for the Steelers, pair him with Joey Porter Jr., and everything was going to be great. But that's not what happened. Joey Porter Jr. was pretty great, but Jalen Ramsey was solid, at the cornerback position. Certainly, in the floating role of slot corner, he was helpful, but he ended up having to move to safety. He wasn't the shutdown one-on-one corner that he's been in the better parts of his career. And meanwhile, the rest of the safety position just floundered. The investments that they made to try to fix the position in place of Minkah Fitzpatrick, Juan Thornhill, and other guys just flopped. They were all complete big misses. DeShon Elliott going down certainly didn't help in that situation. DeShon Elliott, a big part of what made the Steelers safety room so good last year with Minkah. But one thing that I think that the Steelers missed in this season was playmaking at that position, and just simply keeping a lid on the defense at times to keep the big plays from happening there. As we pointed out last season, when you go to sports information systems and you look up, deep balls when Minkah Fitzpatrick was covered, there wasn't a single one beyond 20 yards. That's what he brought to the table as a safety. Yes, he wasn't making a whole lot of turnovers, but he was doing a lot to keep the back of the defense protected. And we talked about how the cornerback position had to be better, so that they could, they could find more ways to force passes to have to go his way when he's in position to make an interception. And now this year they reinvested into the cornerback position and gave up Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then you missed with your cornerback additions in free agency, and you gave away the safety that was keeping things together. And then beyond that, Minkah Fitzpatrick was also a leader in the defense that helped keep things together as well. And so you kind of missed out entirely there. And that's something the Steelers have to address this offseason. You look at the Seahawks and what they were able to do this year. Their safety room wasn't the most dominant part of the team at all, but they had good safeties. Kobe Bryant, Julian Love, good players, and Nick Emmanuel, who is a safety, but basically was their nickelback, but was that a guy who could play in the box, drop back deep, cover in the slot, do all the things that they needed. The Steelers need an ace in the secondary, in the middle part of the field again, like they had with Minkah Fitzpatrick, like they had back in the day with Troy Polamalu. It's weird saying back in the day about a person that I grew up watching, but I'm old now, so I have to accept that. But I look at this and I think that that's something this team needs, but they also need steadiness to go around that guy because, what's one thing that I think that Minkah Fitzpatrick had in his prime years with the Steelers was, even though he wasn't a big-time playmaker, he was certainly a disappointment for being a first-round pick, but Terrell Edmunds was a steady safety. He covered a lot of guys, was kind of the janitor. I called him that on the show because he cleaned up a lot. He didn't, create the turnovers, but he could cover a running back, he could cover a tight end, he could cover a receiver, and he could take up assignments well, and he could communicate well, and that's what made them such a good duo, was that he did that. Ryan Clark was that for Troy Polamalu. Chris Hope was that for Troy Polamalu before Ryan Clark. You don't need everybody to be superstars at the safety position, but if you have one and then other guys in the secondary that kind of set that star safety up, that's what you can do. And that's kind of what the Seahawks with Nick Warren. I think the Steelers could make an effort to rebrand the safety position this offseason with some moves to go get some guys. There's some veterans on the free agent market. Now, you're not going to find a superstar on the free agent market that's going to change everything at the safety position, but there's some veterans that maybe they can take a better swing at this year than they did last year. One guy right now, Cameron Curl, who's set to be an unrestricted free agent. He was a good safety for the Rams this past year. When you look at his coverage numbers, he allowed 1 touchdown, had 3 interceptions, 4 passes broken up, only a passer rating allowed of 83.8. He's a guy who's 27 years old. He could fit that. He's 6'2", and he could be a guy who maybe you're saying, hey, bring him in, give him a solid contract, and maybe he can be, at least your starting free safety or a depth guy that you bring in there. There's other guys out there around the same age, like Jason Pinnock, former Pitt guy I used to cover, but he's transitioned to safety. He's another guy who's 27 years old. He doesn't have the numbers that Cameron Curl has, but they can be other guys that you bring there as a veteran position. But you should draft at least one safety this year, and this is an interesting safety class to pick from on top of signing a good veteran there. And the thing is that I think whatever kind of safety you get here, because y'all are also assuming that DeShon Elliott does return next year, but whatever safety you get here, you're getting with them with being the playmaker type, or at some part. And so there's guys in this class like Caleb Downs is the superstar safety of this class. He's probably going to go in the top 10. If the Steelers found a way, if he fell into a range where the Steelers fell to trading up for him, he'd be one of those guys that I would say, okay, yeah, I know we talked about wide receiver, I know we talked about this, but go get that guy because he's a game changer. He's a potential superstar at the position and can do a whole lot for you there. But beyond him, there's guys that that should be looked at. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo, a guy who can fly around and play in there. Dillon Thieneman out of Oregon. He's more of a strong safety type. Kamari Ramsey is a guy that we talked about at the Senior Bowl. So we did the same with Zakee Wheatley. You guys remember my favorite guy from the Senior Bowl at the safety position was Bud Clark. Michael Toff is another guy out of Texas. There's AJ Halsey, out of LSU. This is an interesting safety class to have, in the NFL draft. But if they were able to get, like a Bud Clark in the 3rd round, and, if they wanted to add a Kamari Ramsey or just a slot corner, we talked about, in one of my first mock draft, I talked about getting a guy like Keontae Scott out of Miami. There's also a guy like D'Angelo Pons out of Indiana, but getting a slot guy and maybe a free safety to add to this team could give you more stability in the secondary, especially in that middle part of the field, because when they gave away Minkah Fitzpatrick, it opened up a huge need for this team that they did not fill. They didn't place in another part of the team. And so now what you've left yourself with is you have Jalen Ramsey on this contract. We'll see if they keep him around with it. But you also have Joey Porter Jr., who is really, really good, but now he doesn't have the support system around him to make it so that, you have a full and complete secondary. And that's something that the Steelers have to do now with this upcoming offseason, is at least start to address that while they address their other things, because they still need to probably double up a wide receiver. I still think they should get a defensive lineman who's going to add to the future there as well. There's a lot of needs for this team, but do not overlook the safety position. I know typically it gets overlooked, but it's one of those positions that really cost the Steelers last year and had been an asset for the Steelers for the past few years. And if you go back to those 2010 years when it was rough at safety, it made it rough for everyone else. It kind of blew up a lot of plays, even when the Steelers had things drawn up well. So that's going to be a position the Steelers need to fix for one of their biggest offseason mistakes last season, the front office, when they moved on from Minkah Fitzpatrick, got Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith in the process, and then didn't replace the safety position with anyone of substance that was going to fill that out. So draft, free agency, it's going to be a big thing. It's why we're going to be looking at safeties in this draft process as we get closer and closer. Combine's in less than 2 weeks, which is kind of crazy to say, but I will be there hosting this show and working for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, giving you my insights on players we talked to there. But safety will be a position that we take a close look at. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are still taking your calls here, by the way. So we got a call and a question, and I think addresses a draft question that's going to be a key question I think a lot of people talk about for the Steelers this year. We'll take that question, and then we'll get to more final stars and skulls grades on the season. It's the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, you trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts all seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I go straight to Indeed and be specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here, moving things right along. Let's go to the Locked On Steelers call-in line, which, by the way, you can call at any point in time. I'm realizing I might have to change this call-in sheet because Mike Tomlin's not the coach anymore, and maybe some of these guys will move on. But as always, if you wanted to call into the show, you can call in by calling 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we will get to your questions on the show. We got this question from Ryan out in North Dakota about the draft, and I think it's very pertinent to the situation the Steelers are in. Take it away, Ryan.
Hey, Chris, it's Ryan from North Dakota. I wanted to rephrase a question I called in previously about what benefits the Steelers more, building your team in this draft and filling in some pieces that we are in much need of, i.e. wide receiver, corner, offensive line in 2026, and then plug and play quarterbacks, starting with Will Howard, and obviously your quarterback that you're most likely drafting in 2027, or reaching for a quarterback in 2026 and bringing back 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers in order to, quote, contend to appease Art Rooney's ego. Let's get some youth in this offense and let them get a year in Mike McCarthy's system, and then cut your young quarterbacks loose and let them grow. I know ownership of the Steelers don't have patience, but I feel like this is what's needed to get us into our next Super Bowl window. Thanks. Love the show as always. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ryan, for your call. Again, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to get your questions on the show. Be sure to call in. We will have We will be taking your calls throughout this off-season period. There's always time to do that more when I'm not covering games and going to practices every day. Also, reminder that the next episode, Monday, will be Mock Draft Monday. So be sure to pay attention to my Twitter account and the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, and also my Blue Sky account, where I post your chance to get your mock drafts in. Take a screenshot of your mock draft, post it there, and then if your mock draft is the one that I think fits the best of what we're talking about, I'll highlight it and we'll talk about it at the end of the show, and you'll get a shout out for participating. Thanks you to the hundreds of people that participate in this every single week. It is crazy how much y'all are into it, and I appreciate it, because mock draft season, baby, it's a lot of fun. But to get to Ryan's question, thank you for calling in from North Dakota. Steelers Nation travels far and wide. Here's the thing, Ryan. I agree that this is the season where you want to load up and start adding, younger offensive pieces to this roster. But I don't think it needs to just be the quarterback position, reaching to go get, a Ty Simpson of sorts in this draft class. If you feel that Ty Simpson is the guy, I'm diving in more and more and building my top 100 big board. My goal is to have it up ready before I go to the combine. But the more and more I'm diving in, there's things that I liked about Ty Simpson during the middle part of the year, but he didn't he didn't have a consistent year. And I think he needs more time in college football before I'm willing to say hey, oh, that's definitely my guy. Now, here's the thing. If they interview him, he aces the interview and he does really well at the combine and he does really well at his pro day and other stuff, you're lining up, then that can change some minds. But, it looked like throughout the year, just from the times that I was able to keep a closer eye on Ty Simpson, when teams started to figure out his tendencies, he didn't really adjust to them. And that's something that a quarterback has to do at any level. So I think that if I'm the Steelers, I hear you on, again, Will Howard is a guy who I said the Steelers should draft last year. They did. I thought he was a steal at getting in the 6th round, but at the same time, I was not saying draft him because I thought he was the future. I thought draft him because he could be a good young quarterback to have in your stable. I also don't think it's anything wrong with keeping around Aaron Rodgers. We talked about this yesterday with Josh Taylor, for just a short-term retread, and just say, hey, you know what, bring him in. You see what Will Howard's got in the preseason and in training camp, as long as he can stay healthy. And then, he can take another year learning from Aaron Rodgers, a full year of being healthy. And who knows, maybe he competes, maybe he takes the backup spot off of Mason Rudolph. Maybe if Aaron Rodgers needs a break or goes down, he gets his shot. But I do think that the thing is, this year is this class is full of talent in a lot of different positions, and it would behoove the Steelers to load up and take advantage of those opportunities. We just got done talking about the safety position and how I think there's a lot of options there, especially in the top 100-ish players, maybe 100, even 20-ish players, that I think could be guys who come in and could be long-term answers and short-term answers for the safety position. But the safety position isn't, the biggest part of this class. I think the wide receiver class is potentially really special. And I continue to look at these guys. I personally think Mekhi Lemon, he's my top wide receiver. I really like Carnell Tate. I've been diving more in on a lot of these wide receivers tapes. And the more and more I look at them, I'm like, man, they could really double up and get 2 guys here with guys who are some really good playmakers. And that's not the only position. I think this could be a really good defensive tackle class. And I've talked about, hey, Cam Hayward was great this year, but you only got another year, a year at best, I think, for Cam Hayward to be Cam Hayward and doing this. You need to be prepared for life without him. And so maybe you want to spend that early pick on a Caden McDonald or a Christian Miller, or maybe you want to pick someone up in the middle rounds like Tim Keenan out of Alabama or Darrell Jackson Jr. out of Florida State. But either way, there are options that available at that position. This could be an interesting cornerback class with you got Mansour Delaney and Jamar McCoy at the top of the class, but you can even get guys in the 2nd round. We talked about Keontae Scott. He was my I think he was my 2nd round pick in my mock draft 1.0 that I did here for you guys about a week ago. And there's Colton Hood out of Tennessee. We talked about Pons earlier as a slot corner. There's other guys down the list who I think could be, good corners to add in this class. But this is a chance to reset a lot of things that the Steelers can and bring to the table for the Steelers to address. You look at with the picks that they have, a first round pick, a second round pick, 2 third rounds, 5 in the top 100, and I don't fully expect them to just sit tight with those 5. I think they're going to use some of their other capital and trade up. But this is the year to be aggressive and get back to trying to make this a roster that when you do find your quarterback, you're hitting the ground running. And I think that's the thing here is that, still try to see what you can do with Will Howard, still try to compete. I know that, Ryan said something about Rooney's ego. I don't think it's ego, man. Like, people don't understand. Your goal is to compete every year. You play to win the game. But in all seriousness, that's a real thing. I keep warning people, like, it's not, you don't want to have to tank. You don't want to try to tank just to get the high pick. You can get the quarterback. You can get the MVP level quarterback without tanking. And again, I pointed this out, but none of the teams in the last now 8 years of MVP award. None of the teams who've had their quarterback win the MVP spot had to tank to get their quarterback. This year it was the Rams with Matt Stafford. They signed him in free agency. Before it was Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs, when they got him, they were the number 2 seed in the AFC playoffs that year. Lamar Jackson was the 32nd pick overall. Josh Allen the Bills were a playoff team the year that they got him. The Steelers could absolutely still compete and get to the playoffs and still go and get the quarterback that they really want if they want to be aggressive enough. But I think that one thing that could make it easier to do that is if you hit on so many positions and you're that set at your roster, you can say, you know what, we can afford to give away our first here to a second and a third, or a second and a second next year. We can afford to be that aggressive because we've been so solid at these other positions, and we want to get this quarterback thing squared away. I think that's where the Steelers are trying to get to. And, tanking, again, I bring this up all the time. People say, what's wrong with tanking? You don't always come back from tanking. And there's some teams that tank and that's just who they are. You can look at the Giants. They hit their tank and they have just been they went from a perennial Super Bowl contender to they've been a laughing stock for years now. Just see all the times we bring up the Giants when it's time to pick, and we talk to Jenna Harner, who's a diehard Giants fan. But I think that's the thing with the Steelers right now is that you can't afford to fall off. So Ryan, I think that the notion that you're saying that this is about Rooney's ego is way off. I think that the whole point here is the Steelers want to compete. The Steelers want to build. They want to build that better roster. And I think this is a year where you can address this roster through several positions in the draft. I think that free agency is going to have some bigger potential players come out soon when teams start making cuts to free up cap space and to figure out who they want to do before the start of the league year, and then free agency opens up. All those things are going to open up doors. Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, and this front office to get who they really think should be part of this roster moving forward. And they have to be ready for that. And I think they should be aggressive. We've talked about that. This is a year to trade up. This is a year to go get who you think is going to fit. But if they do that, I think that in 2020, if you ride it out with Rodgers and Howard and Rudolph for one more year, yeah, you're not going to see the revolutionary play that you want from the quarterback position. But you're positioning yourself so that, hey, next year with Mike McCarthy's offense now in place, whoever's coming in can be part of a system that has a really good offensive line. You're hoping it has a really good run game. You're hoping, like this year, if they hit at wide receiver with 2 of their picks, you have 3 really good wide receivers with those 2 picks in DK Metcalf. You'll still have Pat Freiermuth. Maybe you'll still have Darnell Washington. You'll still have Jalen Warren. Maybe you still have Kenneth Gainwell. And that could be a really good offense for a rookie quarterback to slide into in 2027. And then on the flip side, you still keep developing your defense that is going to be, a decent to good unit, while you're doing all that. So I think there's still potential for this Steelers team. So I'm not going to say they should tank, but I'm also going to say that they that building the roster this year and not just taking the wild shot at quarterback is definitely the move. And that's why we're going to be looking at a lot of different positions over the next few months, and especially the next few weeks with me being at the combine. So stay tuned for all of that. But we talked about the safety position. That's one other position that they can address in free agency and the draft this year. And I want to talk about why they're probably going to need to when I go over the grades of the safety position. That's next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events they only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports that you care about the most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Hockey games that feel different right from the opening faceoff, speed skating races decided by inches, even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. With winter games on, there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel. Play your game. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here. It's time to get to our final grades on the safety position. We've been working our way through the team. We've been doing stars and skulls for those who are new to the show. Our grading systems this after each game, I assign players grades 1 to 3 stars for good to elite play, 1 to 3 skulls for bad to terrible play. We also have the bus ticket grade for when you're truly bad. We'll see at least one of those in this position group coming up here. But what we do throughout the year, we tally those up, and then we kind of lay out who got what grades at the end of the season. Let's start with, and now that we're going to safety, let's start with the guy who did get the bus ticket here. And there were actually a couple bus tickets in the safety group, but the guy who got the worst bus ticket, that was Juan Thornhill. Juan Thornhill, with his position, one star on the year, 4 skulls, and a bus ticket, a final grade of an F right there. Just a rough season for Juan Thornhill. Came in, looked somewhat promising in training camp. Looked like he understood the defense, and also looked promising. He had made a decent play. Looked solid against the Jets in the season opener. Was one of the few guys who did look solid in that season opener. But ultimately, after that one solid game, he had 3 straight skull games. Didn't really have any other games that could be considered a star game, and then had another skull game against the Bengals, and then got a bus ticket grade against the Packers. And then that literally was his bus ticket because he was shipped out of town. He was cut shortly after that. So a few real life bus tickets were actually handed out this year on the grading rubrics there. And it was a rough season for him, especially with the expectations that he was going to come in and try to give a reprieve to for the lack of Minkah Fitzpatrick. And no one was expecting him to replace Minkah Fitzpatrick entirely, but there was an expectation that, hey, maybe he'll be a smart player back there. He'll be a cheaper option who can just keep the play in front of him, not let the big play happen, and that can be the thing that keeps him that helps the Steelers out. So it was unfortunate for Juan Thornhill, but hey, he's also the guy that first said that the team could be one of the greatest of all time or anything like that. And it's like when I got said, I just thought back to all the times where I remembered when I think Vince Young called the Eagles a dream team, and whenever that happens, it's not good. Usually something bad follows. So when that happened, I was like, I don't know, Jim, and certainly it didn't work out for the Steelers in that game. In this season. Let's go to the next safety on the list. A guy that they brought in mid-season, that's Jabril Peppers. Didn't get, when I look back, he actually didn't get as many opportunities as I thought he did through this season. But 1 star, 2 skulls, nothing too crazy. I felt like I didn't understand why he didn't get more chances sometimes, because I've liked Jabril Peppers in other settings with the Browns and the Giants. I think he's done some good things, and not that he's a superstar, but when they were hurting at safety, I just thought, hey, give this guy a chance, but they never did, and I thought that was kind of bizarre. But hey, maybe that's the thing. In practice, things weren't fitting well. He also did suffer some injuries and stuff, but here's the one thing. I'm not going to say that he was terrible. He was just a slightly below average guy that he did what he could, in certain spots. So 1 star, 2 skulls, nothing crazy there in my opinion. But again, this is the problem that we're seeing. I think across the board for the Steelers is you're seeing a lot of these C and C minus grades, and on top of these F grades, and just not nearly as many, B's and A's and things that can carry the secondary, because or not just the secondary, the whole team. When you go throughout the entire roster, there's just some spots there where you're just like, man, that did not. There's a lot of, like, the linebacker position. The best grade was a C plus that came from Patrick Queen. So there's that. But let's go to the next safety here, and this is a guy who I did what he could. He was limited in what he was able to, but that's Chuck Clark. He had three stars, 5 skulls. The grades there, but again, a C minus grade. Wasn't a major liability. Actually helped out in times, and sure, he got cooked on his fair share. But when I look back and counted up all the times he did get cooked, I was kind of like, actually, this wasn't that bad. But again, the point of this was that they when they needed depth at the safety position, they had guys who could fill in. But it's a bunch of guys, we've had an F, a C minus, and a C minus. And, you need more guys that are going to be in the B range, that are going to give you, 7 or 8 skulls or stars more than skulls, guys that are able to impact games a lot more often than these guys did. And, if they weren't, giving up the big plays, they weren't really making the plays. And that was the other part of this was that was part of this, this team in general in the secondary. Let's get to other guys. Another guy they brought in to try to fill things in the middle of the year. And this one was an interesting case. Kyle Duggar. Kyle Duggar finished the year 8 stars, 7 skulls, good enough for a C grade. Kyle Duggar, man, there was at one point in the season where I was like, hey, man, he might be the truth. They might have figured it out. His first game came in against the Colts, filled in really quickly, had a 2-star game that week, a 1-star game against the Chargers, and then he had a 3-star game with his pick 6 against the Bengals in week 11. So I was like, in 3 games, he's got 6 stars. This guy's on fire. Like, he's going to be a stud. But then he had a rough game against the Bears, was kind of neutral for a bit, had a not so great game against the Dolphins. Ed was solid against the Lions and Browns, but then got just destroyed in the Ravens game in the regular season finale, and then wasn't that great either in the Texans playoff game. And so, again, average player, but again, that's what you're kind of going for when you're trading for a guy mid-season, because you're that hurt up at the safety position. And so, that's another guy there. Now, another guy, of course, that paired with him and filled it back in the safety when the injuries mounted and Juan Thornhill got cut was Jalen Ramsey. And now Ramsey on the year, 9 stars, 10 skulls, good enough for a C minus grade. Now, part of this is just unfortunate for how, he kind of, I think, when he switched to safety, he also looked pretty solid at first. He had 2 stars against the Colts, 1 star against the Chargers. But he was also picked on in that Bears game, two skulls in that game, and both Ravens games. He was kind of victimized. He was a 2 skull grade against the Ravens the first time, a 3 skull grade against the Ravens the second time. And so it was really 4 games that when he was roughing, he was really roughing, because he also got beat up a lot in that Bengals game, which was kind of like the beginning of the end of him being a corner for the Steelers this past season. Jalen Ramsey's, man, I think that if he could be back in the slot cornerback position and float around a bit more, he could be the presence that you want. But when he was asked to be in that safety role, he was solid for a bit. But eventually you could see that's not the position that he's trained in for most of his life. And so that's a rough to be in. So we'll get to our final grade for the safety group, and that's the guy who didn't get to play a whole lot this year, but it's DeShon Elliott. He had 5 stars and 2 skulls in pretty much I think 6 games he played. So that was good enough for a B grade, because he only played 6 games and got 5 stars out of it, including a 3-star performance against the Vikings, where I thought he was a catalyst for that win in Ireland. But if the Steelers are getting him back next year, great. But they need to figure out other options around him, because he helps against the run. He helps against the pass. He can communicate. He can fly around. He can hit. But they need another guy that can do that. And if it's a young guy, great. But if it's a young guy or veteran, whoever, they need to get this group together. And I think they can keep Jalen Ramsey around and make him one of that floating defender who can make plays in different areas, because he certainly started to feel himself in the defense and start to feel out where he can most impact games. but they need another guy that's young, speedy, athletic, and the deep safety. And that's why I keep looking at a guy like Bud Clark as, a potential guy that could be back there, fly around, use really good speed, make plays on the ball. And not be afraid to come up and help with the hit. And again, maybe be like, the Seahawks and some of these other defenses that are starting to deploy more 3 safety formations where, one guy's, covering the slot, the other 2 guys are playing traditional safety roles, or they could be blitzing. And I think that's something that the Steelers need to add as far as a spice to their team moving forward, because really, when it came to the safety position, it was very milquetoast for most of the year. And that hadn't been the case for the Steelers in recent seasons where their defense actually was very, very good. But this has been the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. A reminder, you can find myself, Christopher Carter, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, wherever you get social media. My handle is always at Carter Critiques. Read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Break it down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here on Monday. Remember, it's Mock Draft Monday. Submit your mock drafts on the post that I put up on my Twitter account, the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, and on my Blue Sky account. Put your screenshots, and be sure to leave your name too, because if you're one of those people that doesn't put your name in your profile, it can be tough. But we love to look at those, and we'll see if your mock draft won the Mock Draft Monday contest for the Monday episode. We'll see you here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.